Hello book lovers and welcome back or welcome to Nat Cat's Bookish Cafe. Today I am here to go through my goals for 2025. Alright guys, so if you have been on my channel for a little while, you know that for 2024, I decided for the first time to put my annual reading goals into a bingo format. And I have once again decided to do that. So we are going to be going through 19 reading goals, and then I also have 6 books that I have on this TBR. There are certain aspects of this that are essentially exactly the same as they were last year. There are some goals that are similar, but maybe some of the numbers pertaining to them have changed a little bit, and some goals are completely new. But before we get into the goal portion of this video, I would like to focus on those 6 books, which this year is going to be different than the year before. So for 2024, essentially what I did is I chose 6 books that I was excited to read. 3 of them were new releases and 3 of them were books by authors that I have already read and enjoyed and had already on my shelf. This year, we're doing it a little bit different, where I have chosen 6 books that if I do not finish them by the end of the year, they will self-destruct. So essentially, I'm combining my 2025 bingo board with a version of these books will self-destruct. These are books that I've been on my shelf for a while, some of them longer than others, but I definitely have felt my interest in them waning a little bit as the year goes by. They're not often selected to be on TBRs or even really considered for those TBRs. So I figured, if these books are still here by the end of the year, even when I have them kind of set as a priority, then it's just not meant to happen. So let's start off with those 6 books. Then we'll go into the goals that are essentially the same. Those should be pretty quick to get through. Then we'll talk through the ones that are changing a little bit, and then we'll end with the completely new goals that I'm setting for myself this year. So this first book should look rather familiar to you, and that is going to be Babel by R.F. Kuang. This was a book that was in my challenge cup in the year of 2024. I pulled it towards the end of the year and I just never got around to it. And honestly, my desire to pick it up was pretty low. This is a well-beloved historical story that has a sprinkle of fantasy within it. This is a well-respected author who I have not gotten around to reading. And while I'm definitely sure I will check her out someday, is this the book that I want to read? I'm not really sure. I felt like my interest in the story was never as strong as others, and maybe I was pushed to try it just based off of the hype. But I really want to make sure that I am only reading books that I really want to read and not just reading books because they are hyped. And this is just one of those books where you have to be in a very specific mood to read it. It's highly academic. It has a lot of commentary on colonialism, on the telling of history and who has the power to decide what is written down, the power of language, all of that jazz. There's a lot going on in this book, and while I think the concepts in this book are very important, I have heard that it can be a little bit in your face and lacks a little bit of subtlety, which I think for a book this long, being hit over the head with it could get a little bit annoying in my opinion. But I don't know, obviously I want to give this book a try and build my own opinion around it, but we will see if it happens. If it doesn't, then I don't know. I'll just get rid of it. As always, I want to say if I ever do a self-destruct list, I allow myself to save one of the books that I did not get around to reading. I'm just saying that now so that when I inevitably save one of these books, because I know myself, I'm probably not going to read them all next year, you don't think I'm cheating. The next book on here is actually a book that I just recently got within like a month or two. So you're like, why is this on a self-destruct list? You just got it. it hasn't even been in a haul yet. And that is going to be The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian by Sherman Alexie. This is an author I have read before and actually own 2 other books aside from this one. And this was a book that I got from a family member. She sent us a large box of books. I recognized this author and decided to pick it up, but I also know that this is just not one of his stories that I'm as drawn to as his others, and that if I don't read it within a year of getting it, it'll probably be sitting on my shelf for 4 to 5 years, and that's just not something that I'm interested in. I really kind of want to pick it up while it's hot so it doesn't become a book covered in cobwebs or anything like that. I'm not even really sure what it's about. I almost wonder if it's more of a young adult story. It's just giving that vibe. It just says that this story is inspired by the author himself, and then it chronicles the contemporary adolescence of one unlucky boy trying to rise above the life everyone expects him to live. So it's not the story that calls to me the most, so I am putting on here because it is a very popular book, so it would be great if I picked it up. But knowing myself, it's definitely not a priority unless I force it to be a priority. Up next, we have a very popular book by a very popular author that I really want to give a try. Is this where I want to start? Do I want to skip this series? Do I want to skip this book? I don't know. And that is Twisted Love by Anna Huang. This is a book that not a lot of people like. They seem to like the later books in this contemporary kind of companion series. This one has primarily negative reviews just from the circles that I swim around in, but that does mean that my interest in the story has definitely decreased. Also, I have not had the best of luck with contemporary romance, particularly white heterosexual contemporary. It just hasn't been doing it for me and hasn't been giving me much. It's just been a little annoying and a little boring, and my tolerance for it has definitely decreased over the year. So I definitely did have a few contemporary romances that I decided to put on this self-destruct list, but I decided to settle for just 2 of them, and this is the first of it. I really don't know much about it. I'm not sure if this is one of those like Big Brother or like, yeah, Brother's Best Friend. That's what I'm looking for. Brother's Best Friend. For some reason, when it comes to straight couples, I don't like the brother's best friend trope. I can do it with queer couples, but with the friend of the big brother falling for the friend's little sister, that it's giving incestuous vibes to me for some reason. So I just really struggle with that trope. So I have a feeling that I probably won't like this, but that being said, this is definitely an author I want to check out. If I decide I don't read this book and maybe only read the more popular books in this series, or even just jump into her later series, I will eventually try her out. Up next, we have Fingersmith by Sarah Waters. I believe this is almost a modern classic, or maybe I'm mixing this up with another book. This is a older sapphic story. I found this at a used bookstore and saw it was queer, so I decided to pick it up. It is a relatively popular story when it comes to older queer fiction. It is also chunky, and so it has kind of intimidated me to the point where I'm like, I don't know if I will ever pick this up. It is also a historical story. I believe we have one woman who is trying to con another woman on behalf of a gentleman, but then she starts to fall for the woman she is trying to con. So it definitely sounds like it would be maybe an intriguing story. It really is the size of it and the fact that I don't read a lot of historical stories that is keeping me from reading this. So we'll see. I think as far as the ones that are on this list, this is probably the highest priority one, the one that, if I'm being honest, if I didn't get around to reading it, I would probably save it, but I really am kind of hoping to get to it this year. Up next, we have that second contemporary romance that I hinted at earlier. This is actually one that I started and then temporarily DNF'd. Will it turn into a permanent DNF? I'm not really sure. And that is It Happened One Summer by Tessa Bailey. You can see I have a receipt in here. It hasn't even earned itself a true bookmark at this point, and I got a whopping 38 pages into it. This is just your classic rich girl goes to small town, meets guy who thinks he's above, falling for the pretty rich girl, but he's not situation. I've never read Tessa Bailey. I feel like when it comes to her books, this one, and specifically the second one in the series, is more popular. Her books seem to be good and bad in equal measure, so I'm not really sure what to think of her. I was just not in the mood for the kind of dynamics that were being presented in this book. It was a gift from Is Bailey Reading, a subscriber and someone that I subscribe to as well, so I did want to give it a second chance before permanently DNFing it, so I will have to see if I can get to it this summer. And the final book on this is going to be Master of One. This is by Jada Jones and Diana Bennett. This is a standalone queer fantasy story. The issue is I just have not heard the greatest things about it, and it does seem to revolve a little bit around fae, and I do not have a good record with fae. Fae-based stories are just not my forte. I don't really seem to like that subgenre, trope, whatever you want to call it. So I have definitely been nervous to read this. I think I have put it on 1 or 2 TBRs. I know it was at least on 1 TBR this year, possibly my Spookopoly one, because I know I was slumping very hard in December and didn't get to a ton of the books on my TBR. So that might have been one of the books that I tried to read. It is once again a little chunkier, but it is a standalone, so it would be nice for me to check out, especially since I do love me a queer story, but just because it's queer doesn't mean I'm instantly gonna enjoy it, especially if it has other things working against it. So I will probably try to get it. It's probably, once again, kind of closer to the top of my priority list with this, but it has been on my TBRs and ignored multiple times. It's been on my shelves for at least 2-3 years at this point. So there are so many other queer and fantasy stories out there that have my attention, and maybe it is time for me to pass this on and move on to other things. All right, guys, so these are the 6 books that will self-destruct at the end of the year. If I don't get to them, I will definitely try to prioritize them throughout the year, but I say that all the time about many books, and I don't do that. So, you know, who knows where we will be at the end of 2025. All right, guys, now that we have gotten through the book portion, let's get into the goal portion. And once we finish that up, I will go ahead and show you how the bingo board looks. I have already set it up and everything. Essentially what I did is I took all of my goals and books that were gonna go onto this bingo board. I put them in a spinning wheel, shuffled and spun, and then added them into the board in the order of which I spun them. So that's just how it's gonna look. But first, let's go ahead and get into the goals that are essentially exactly the same. The first goal, and a goal that I have had for, I don't even know, maybe 2-3 years at this point, is to read 100 books. For the last few years, I have read over 100 books, so I think it is definitely an attainable goal that I don't overly have to stress about. I am, like many people in the book community, kind of trying to focus on reading less. I have heard a lot of people talking about that. That is something I tried to do this year. Try not to like stress too much, and especially try not to read more than I did the year before, which I think was like 130 something books. We don't need to be reading that much. We need to like read longer books, more complicated books. We need to just like calm down, and if we don't want to read on a day, don't read that day. It's totally fine. So I think that 100 is a goal that I can relatively easily obtain. At the same time, if I read less than 100, I'm not going to be too upset about it. The next goal that will be the same is to read 10 books by Hispanic or Latinx authors. This is a goal that I know that I did not do as good as I wanted to this year. It's definitely something that I need to more actively pursue. I don't have too many Hispanic authors on my physical TBR, so oftentimes if I am choosing books that are just on my physical TBR, my probability of choosing a Hispanic author is lower. Luckily, in the last few months, I did pick up a few, but I just need to go ahead and either utilize my library for that or purchase more books by Hispanic authors moving forward. So that is a goal I'm setting again because I did not achieve it. However, it is something that is important to me. Next goal that is going to be the same is to reread 6 books. I did make a separate video for that where I have already pre-selected the 6 books that I will be reading, so you can go ahead and check that out if you haven't yet. Next goal that'll be the same is to read 6 nonfiction books. Honestly, I would love if I eventually became one of those people that read 1 nonfiction per month, but considering I might not even hit 6 this year, I don't think it's gonna happen. I think I'll hit 5, but not 6. I am gonna go ahead and just get used to the idea of reading a nonfiction every other month, and hopefully we can kind of build our stamina up to 1 nonfiction a month. I really do enjoy reading nonfiction, but it does take a little bit more time for me to get through those, and I often find myself prioritizing fiction over nonfiction, especially since this is a channel where I talk about fiction more, though I'm sure you guys would enjoy hearing about some good nonfiction books for you to check out as well. Yes? No? Another goal that I'm going to keep the same is going to be reading 20 books by Black authors. This is a goal that I went ahead and achieved this year, but I'm going to go ahead and just keep it the same to make sure that I am continuing to prioritize Black authors. But there are definitely authors of different ethnicities and races that I need to prioritize more, so I'm not increasing that number or anything at this time. I will say that this is kind of like the bare minimum, in my opinion, for how many books that I'm reading, so I always appreciate if I do go above and beyond, which I didn't really this year. Reading 50% queer books is a common goal that I've had for a few years now. I read a lot of queer books. I really love reading queer books, and so I do want to make sure that at least 50% of them are queer. It doesn't take me a lot to achieve that goal, honestly. Just me naturally picking up my books, it usually ends up being slightly more queer books than hetero books, which is the way I like it. The next goal that is exactly the same, actually not even similar, exactly the same, is reading 10 Kindle books. This is not a goal that I achieved this year, not even close. I did purchase or download a lot more Kindle books. Most of these were obtained during those Stuff Your Kindle days, and so I definitely have more books on my Kindle than ever before, but I am still not reading them. So we are gonna try again to read 10 Kindle books so that we actually get through them and they're not just sitting there uselessly. Reading 5 books by Indigenous authors is another goal that is staying the same. It is another goal that I unfortunately did not achieve this year. Reading books by Indigenous authors has always been a bit of a struggle for me just because of the genres of books that Indigenous authors are often writing in and that are presented to me. So it definitely takes me a lot more effort to go out and find books by Indigenous authors and them be books that I actually want to read on top of that, because I don't want to just willy-nilly pick up a book I'm not interested in just because it's by an Indigenous author. Luckily, I do have a few on my shelves right now that are waiting to be read, including the Sherman Alexie. He is an Indigenous author, so I am feeling more optimistic about being able to achieve this goal going into 2025. All right, and the last goal that is going to be essentially the same is going to be the amount of money that I want to spend on books. I always set the goal at $1,000 for the year. So far, I have not gone over that amount, so it has definitely worked for me. I will say that I don't have any like subscription boxes. I did recently purchase some books from Aardvark, I believe is what they're called, and I will probably continue to purchase from them, but it won't be a monthly occurrence. I do count my KU subscriptions towards that, but I only get KU every few months during months when I'm planning on reading multiple KU books. It's not something that I have every single month. I also just don't buy too many books because I don't have too much room to put them, and also I like to keep my physical TBR manageable. Otherwise I get a little bit overwhelmed. So I think that is a good number for me. It's worked out relatively well for me, and so we're gonna go ahead and aim for under $1,000 again in 2025. All right, moving into the goals that I have had before, but some of the numbers associated with it have changed. The first is regarding the number of translated books. I believe that in 2024 I wanted to read 25. I didn't quite hit that because some of the books that I was expecting to read that were translated, I just didn't read. My interest in them waned a little bit. So this year I am bringing that number down to 20. I think it'll be a little bit more manageable since I am not getting into manga as much as I initially thought I would be. Up next, we have a goal regarding disability representation, and my goal is to read 20 books that have disability representation in them. This last year my goal was to read 30, and I did actually achieve that. However, I was reading a series by Cole McCade, Criminal Intentions, that had a disabled character. He had autism, and that added a lot to that. And while I will technically be reading that series again, I kind of figured I would go ahead and drop this number, not because I want to read less books with disability representation, but because I want to read less books in general. And I felt like if I read 100 books, 20% of them having disability representation was a good baseline for me. So that is the number I have settled on for now. And the second to last goal that is similar but slightly changed is going to be the one revolving around the amount of series that I am completing. I set the goal at 10 last year. I did hit that relatively early in the year. Will it happen as quickly here in 2025? Probably not. The fact that I spent the entire month of January plowing through series for Squash That series definitely helped, but I did decide, because I have so many series going on right now and I completed relatively few in 2024, that I was going to go ahead and bump that number up to 15. So I'm going to see if I can complete, not catch up on, but like complete 15 series in 2025. And the final goal that is similar is going to be to complete my challenge cup. Last year we only had 10 books in there, and this year we have 11, but I did make a separate video showing you which books are going to be in the challenge cup this year, and I will be drawing one of those every month, January through November. So hopefully, unlike this year, I actually complete that goal. I definitely have some interesting books in there that I'm excited to get to. Now let's go ahead and jump into those final goals that are completely new. The first goal is for me to read all of the books on my physical TBR that I bought before the year of 2022. I am the kind of person who has changed my reading habits and what I like to read a lot over the last few years, and I have a feeling it's gonna continue to change, and that's why I don't like to have books on my TBR, on my physical TBR, for too long. And these books are getting to the point where they are 3 or 4 years old. I don't have very many of them on that list. I think there's maybe 12, 13 of them, but I would like to go ahead and just clear those out just for the satisfaction of it. So I did go ahead and decide to make that a goal. I do have a couple of those books on my winter TBR, so fingers crossed I get to them in the winter. And then I was hoping to do maybe like 2 or 3 vlogs where I focus on clearing out those last few oldies that are still sitting on my shelf. The next goal is that I read 10 books books that are over 500 pages. This is just me trying to get to some of those books that I have been avoiding because they are long and so they take me longer to read, and I sometimes feel guilty when it comes to wrap-ups if I don't have as many books to talk about. But there are long books that I want to read, so I do want to go ahead and try and prioritize some of those, and my brain telling me that at least it's going towards a goal, it'll help me out a little bit. The next goal is that I would like to once a quarter do a 48-hour readathon, and this is just me. This isn't something that I'm going to be doing like with my subscribers or anything. I am not the channel to come to for any sort of readathons. I've never done them. I don't know if I ever will. This is me attempting to dedicate some time on the weekend for reading, because I don't read on the weekend very often because I feel like during the week I am working full time, and then the weekend comes around and I have all these things that I have to do that I didn't have time to do during the week. So this is me just kind of being like, hey, once a quarter, you know, just dedicate a weekend to where you just read all the books that you want to read, and you don't have to worry about running errands or doing chores or anything along those lines. Just push all obligations and just relax and focus on a hobby that you really like to do, which is something I feel a lot of guilt around doing if I do it. So that's why I'm only doing it once a quarter. But I think it'll help me get a little bit better at, you know, maybe sitting down and actually relaxing and doing the things that I enjoy doing on my weekends. Another goal of mine is for 25% of my books to be indie or self-published. I have always tracked this, but I never really paid too much attention to whether I was picking up a traditional indie or self-published book, and I do want to focus on that a little bit more, especially since I feel like my satisfaction with the traditionally published books, especially when it comes to romance, has not been the best recently. The second to last goal is to read 24 library books. I figured this averages out to about 2 library books a month, and this is specifically physical library books, so it doesn't include Libby. I will say that if I decide to get like an ebook from the library, which is very rare, I will go ahead and count it towards this goal. But this is just me wanting to make sure that I'm supporting my library, and it also helps me with saving money in that I am reading books from the library before purchasing them or instead of purchasing them. The final goal on this list is a pretty big one, but I think that I can do it. I'm kind of trying to think of how it's looking for me this year, and that is to read or have read 50% of the books that I purchase. So essentially 50% of the books that I bring in 2025 will have been read by the end of 2025. I think that's a pretty good number, especially considering how few books I bring in, and oftentimes I am bringing in continuations of series or often purchasing books that I know I'm going to read relatively soon. But this is also a good way to make sure that we're not buying books that are destined to sit on my shelves forever. I will say I was thinking that when it came to books that I received for my birthday and Christmas, that they would go ahead and count towards the following year, because my birthday is on November 25th, and by then I usually do have my December TBR already decided, and of course by the time Christmas comes around I would have essentially like 5 days to read those books. So I figured, you know, for them to go ahead and already count against the following year would be a little bit more fair, rather than counting books that I literally have no chance of reading towards that goal. But we'll kind of see how I'm doing. I'll kind of decide towards the end of the year. On the one hand, it could also push me to read the books that I'm buying earlier in the year to make sure that the books that I'm receiving for my birthday and Christmas don't cause me to fail this goal. So we'll see what I end up doing. I'm still a little wishy-washy on that. Maybe I'll decide towards the end of the year based off whatever benefits me more. But that being said, guys, here is the 2025 bingo board. I am not sure if I'm gonna do this in 2026. It was definitely very hard for me to try and find 19 goals to put on here. So maybe we'll either shrink down the bingo board a little bit in the future, or we will just try out something new. But I do love me a good bingo board. So for 2025, this is what I'll be using. All right, guys, I would love to know if you have set any goals for 2025. I would also love to know if any of the books that I have on this bingo board that are due to self-destruct at the end of the year are books that you want me to prioritize. As always, guys, thank you so much for supporting my channel by watching my videos, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!